Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back for another PLO Bro hand analysis. We're in Poker Juice today. We're going to be looking at an aces hand. I think in PLO, a lot of new players and low stakes players find themselves unsure of how to play aces, especially players transitioning from Hold'em. And so we're going to look at one of these spots and try to look at some of the math behind whether or not we should be getting it all in or playing more passively, and what is the correct play and what is a fairly common spot. So one thing that's interesting here is we do take this three-way instead of heads up, and I think that at like maybe PLO 50 and below, it's going to be pretty common. And yeah, so we'll just see how this plays out. So we're five-handed when this takes place, and middle position opens, and we three bet for pot. We have ace ace 10-3 with nut spades. What I do like about this hand, it's not the most connected aces hand, but you can make both the wheel and the Broadway straight. So it's got, I think, more potential than something like ace ace jack 6 or ace ace queen 7 or something like that. So the button decides to cold call, which makes this an interesting dynamic because now the blinds fold and MP flats, so we're sandwiched. We have position on the middle position player, but are out of position against the button. Another interesting dynamic is that this creates a really low SPR. So against the button particularly, the effective SPR is like 2.1, 2.2. And overall against MP, we have a little bit more. We have an extra pot size bet behind. So our effective against the field right now is about an SPR of 3.1 or so. So flop comes 9-3-4 with two diamonds and a heart, and I think this is a pretty solid flop for aces here. Number one, let's think about, so like middle position shouldn't be raising, open raising very many hands at all that make a set on this board. We also block the three, so it's really hard for him to have a set of threes. And it also blocks a lot of two pairs. And again, there's not going to be very many hands that he is opening with from middle position that hit two pair on this board. The same goes for the button. Like, he cold called a three bet, not knowing whether or not, he's got three players that remain to act, including the original raiser. So it's pretty unlikely that the button is cold calling this three bet with a hand that connects with this board that strongly as well. So that's one of the reasons I think this is a great board. When we bet and stack off on the flop and just get stacks in right here, I think that it's much more likely that we're going to be up against like pair plus flush draw hands or bare flush draws with overcards, flush draws with some backdoor straight draws, that type of thing. And we'll take a closer look at that here in just a second. So middle position checks, and I go ahead and bet out about 40% of the pot, which I don't like at all, to be honest. So why I think this is a mistake. Well, first, what I think was going through my mind when I made this play. Number one, I was thinking that, okay, against the button, I think that I'm happy to get it in. But if the button jams and then the middle position player re-jams over the top, I can fold, and I haven't committed my stack, and I've put the minimum amount in. But I think that the problem or the flaw in that logic is that we're offering the button in middle position an incredibly good price to see a turn for super cheap. So, like, I'm against two opponents, and basically if either one of them has anything at all, they're getting the price to call, and they should continue, and we're letting them realize their equity at a price where we're making it a mistake for them to fold, and we don't. That's the opposite of what we want to happen. We want, in this spot with ace-ace, no real redraws, we want them to fold out what equity they do have. So I think that this should just be a pot, and we're going to call it off and get it in. We're going to commit our stack here on the flop, on this flop. So I'm going to say just outright, I think that that bet sizing is a pretty big mistake, and it should have been large. The button does decide to jam over the top, though, and middle position folds. So what was going through my head actually did play out to an extent, where I think what I was thinking is I bet small and the button jams. I can see what middle position does before making a decision. And when he folds, I think this is a pretty clear call. But we're going to look at it in a little more detail and try to understand why this is a clear call. So first, what we want to do is look at the button's stack off range here. So we assigned him a 15% minus top 2% cold call range pre-flop. That might be a little wide, but I think a PLO 50, particularly on certain sites, the 15% cold call range from the button minus the top 2% because he didn't 4-bet is fairly reasonable. Especially when you have players that are VPIPing like 60%. So then we use the range distribution module to break down the different ranges that he is going to be shoving with. So what we're doing is seeing how his overall shoving range is distributed amongst the different hand classifications. So in range A, we assign sets. Range B, we assign 2 pair. Range C, we're going to say that he'll shove with a pair, any pair plus an 8 high flush draw or better. I chose 8 high somewhat arbitrarily, I guess. But I think that he's going to be shoving a lot more of the lower pair plus weaker straight or weaker flush draws, simply because going to the flop, his stack to pot ratio is only 2. So he needs to be getting it in with almost anything. So this range could potentially even be wider than what we've assigned him here, but I think that it's at least a reasonable starting point. So range C, a pair plus an 8 high flush draw or better. Range D, a pair plus an open end straight draw or better, which would be include wraps. E is king high flush draws and better, which they can't have a nut flush draw because the ace, but I was running some calculations to see how this is affected if we had the ace of clubs instead of the ace of diamonds, and we'll discuss that here in a minute. And then a wrap that doesn't have a pair, because if it had a pair, it would fall into range D. So we run that, and we see that his range is very heavily weighted to pair plus flush draw hands. He has a set 9% of the time, and we're in pretty terrible shape against sets. But he has a set so few of the times because, number one, we block the 3. Number 2, he shouldn't have cold called a 3-bet with 3-3, 4-4, 9-9 in his hand for the most part. Maybe a few 9-9 combos, but there's not very many of them. And you see that he has 2 pair even less. But range A and B comprise the hands that we are currently behind on in showdown value. And we see that he only has those hands just under 13% of the time. So when he's stacking off here, he's putting his whole stack in, but we're actually not behind that often. And we have a lot of equity even against the 2 pair hands. Part of that is because we have an overcard to the board with the 10 and we paired the 3. So range B here wouldn't be as high if we didn't have a 3 and an overcard to the board. But that distinction isn't going to make a huge difference here because it's only 4% of his range. So 13% of the time, though, he's got a made hand better than us. 70% of the time, he's got a pair plus flush draw, which is really heavily weighting like his shove range to pair plus flush draw hands. And you can say pair plus straight draws without an 8 high flush draw are better, obviously. 6% of the time, bear king high flush draw 10% of the time, and a bear wrap 0.77% of the time. So the 86, well, this is too small to click here. Yeah, there we go. 87% of the time, we are ahead in showdown value based on his range here, his shoving range. And it is against that range that we have 45% equity against this total range. And we see here that our stack off equity, which is the equity we need to get it all in here, is 33.86%. So we have well above what we need equity-wise to stack off against the button in this situation. So another aspect that I like to look at, other than simply the stack off equity versus his stack off range, which we have here, to see if we have the equity stack off, I like to use this peel and stack off module to see what the equity value of the peel is. And this is just saying that he's stacking off, he's putting this additional $1.64 in the pot 100% of the time. He's never folding on any turn card, which is obvious, but this calculation is really helpful sometimes when they put in a big raise and they have a reasonable stack left behind them where they might actually fold on certain turn cards. And this will show you what percentage of turn cards that's going to be. So we have 44% equity against. Really, I think that the difference between here and here is just the number of trials that are being run. But that's okay. It's probably a rounding difference. And we see that the expected value of calling this off is $10.30. So that's 20.6 big blinds. So when you have a spot that is, 20.6 big blinds for a single, as the expected value on a single hand or a single play is significant. 20 big blinds is a good profit for a single play. So not only does this show that we need 34% and we have 45%, so we have the raw, like the straight up equity given the pot size that we need, but it also shows our expected value is 20.6 big blinds, which puts a little bit of a different, perspective on what the spread between our equity and our required equity means in dollar terms for us. So we end up calling this off, obviously, and we end up putting it all in, but to run out the turn in the river and to run this module here, it couldn't be all in, so I just left that in the stack. But we turn 6 of clubs and the ace of clubs and take it down. So the button actually showed up with king, queen, 10 for double suited. So he flopped middle pair and a flush draw and a backdoor flush draw along with a backdoor straight draw. So especially with a stack to pot ratio of 2, the button is fist pumping getting it in. So if we go back to the flop and look at his actual hand, he was just under a... Oh, we got to fold out MP. Yeah, here we go. I want to say it's like he was just under a 2-to-1 favorite. Yeah, 64-36. So he was just under a 2-to-1 favorite here, which is a pretty good spot for him to be in with this hand. But what's important for us to recognize is that the button with this specific holding, the button is near the top of his range on this flop. So like other than sets, this is pretty much like as good of a spot as he can hope to be in. No, he's got just a ton of potential equity on the turn. If he doesn't catch up on the turn, he's got a ton of cards. Like any heart is awesome for him. And I mean, if the turn is a heart that doesn't repair his hand, like say it's the Jack of Hearts where he turns a wrap, he'd have a double flush draw, a pair, and a wrap. And I don't know that there's like hardly any way I can win if that happens. But the point is, this hand is at the top, near the top of the button's range, and we still have 36% equity when we need 33.86% to stack off. So even against a hand that he's shoving this strong, we got to get it in, and it's pretty straightforward. So how is this affected if we don't have the ace of diamonds and say we have the ace of clubs? For time's sake, I'm not going to run this. I have run it already. I'm not going to go through changing all of these and rerunning the hand and all the numbers. But surprisingly, so yeah, my initial thought was maybe the ace of holding the ace of diamonds could potentially be a detractor from our equity because it removes all of the nut flush draws from the button's range. So all of the bare nut flush draws from his range, which means that his range is going to have a higher weighting towards hands with pairs and two pair and set hands. But to my surprise, the ace of diamonds actually decreases the button's equity from a range perspective, not this specific hand, but from his range perspective, and our hand against his range from 60. Yeah, from 55.45 to... I'm sorry, I'm getting confused. If we, with the diamond, we're 55.45. If we take the ace of diamonds out, we lose 1% and it becomes a 56.44, which, and then if you look at the range distribution here, yeah. If you look at the range distribution here, I can't get this little one unclicked. There we go. It adjusts. Let's look at the actual ones. Instead of it making range E a lot bigger, because instead of only having the bare king high flush, you can have the bare king high flush draw and the bare nut flush draw. It does increase this a little bit, like 1 or 2%, but it increases C more as well, and it adds a lot of pair plus flush draw hands into his range, to the point that, and because we're a slight dog against range C, it's a virtual flip, but he does have a 4% edge here. So by adding pair plus nut flush draw hands into his range, into his range, that 4% edge increases his overall equity 1% and decreases our overall equity 1%. And I guess that makes sense from a logical perspective, because pre-flop, he's going to be cold calling with a lot of like nut flush draw hands, like connected ace high flush draw hands. And the fact that on this board, he can't have a pair in the nut flush draw, like, significantly decreases the number of combos of that can fall into range C as well as E, but particularly range C. So in this spot, particularly with the SPR being what it is, it doesn't really make much of any difference. But I did find that as an interesting little factoid that the ace of diamonds, like, regardless of like any blocker effect to the flush, it just reduces the number of pair plus flush draw combos that he can have, because his pre-flop range that is cold calling a 3-bet is going to have a lot more, is going to have a significant number, a fairly decent number of nut flush draw hands in them. So by us holding the diamond, it takes a lot of combos out of his range and helps our equity versus his total range. So I think, like, for transitioning Hold'em players, low stakes PLO players, it's not, the way you have to look at it isn't so much about like, oh, I have aces, I have the best hand, this pot is mine, which is kind of what happens, I feel like, in Hold'em. A lot of players, when you get aces and no limit, it's easy to just expect to win the pot because you have such a huge pre-flop equity advantage that you're just going to win a lot of pots with aces. In PLO, aces are still the strongest hand that you can get. Obviously, your side cards can help make them even stronger, but particularly aces with at least one suit. I mean, like, you just want to pile the money in pre-flop while you have a guaranteed statistical equity edge. But the difference is that you will lose more often with aces than you will in Hold'em, and you're going to be getting it in. When you do get it all in, it's going to be, you're not going to be cooler in somebody with, like, your over pair versus their top pair top kicker or something like that, when like you would in Hold'em. Like, say you have aces and the board comes, you're in a tournament or something, and the board comes, queen 9-5, and you just get it in against ace queen with your aces and stack them. It's not really how aces work in PLO. It's more about, you're going to have an equity advantage and you want to get money in the middle pre-flop, and then based on the SPR and the way the flop hits your opponent's ranges, you have to make a determination of whether or not you want to try and pile money in and commit your stack, or play it cautiously, or even just give up on the hand in some situations. And I think this is a situation that's a clear get it in situation based on the ranges and the numbers that we've run here. And I think the big mistake of this hand that could have been problematic had the hand played out differently, i.e. the button not jammed on us, is this small C bet size is just going to get us into trouble and was stupid. This is a board where, with an SPR of 2 versus the button and an SPR of 3 versus middle position, we're happy to just pot and get it in. And we're going to be able to fold out a lot of hands that have significant amount of equity against us, even if they're a current dog. On 2 streets, they have a lot of ways to catch up to 2 pair hands, etc. So anytime we can fold out a hand that made a pair, we're over-realizing our equity. And then when we do get it in, just realize that, when you get it in with aces on a board like this, you're not getting it in as a massive favorite, and in a lot of situations you're getting it in as a slight dog, but you're getting it in with the current best showdown value. Like in this situation, only against the button's jam range that we gave him, we have the best showdown hand on the flop 87% of the time. But we're still a slight equity dog. So the point is that we don't want to let him catch up to us for cheap, and we just want to get it in because the SPR is low and it's It's just a little bit different from a playability standpoint than in No Limit. So at any rate, I'm going to wrap it up here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and feel free to comment. Let me know the types of hands you'd like to see broken down. Give me your opinions on the spots. Hit like, thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and also come check me out at twitch.tv/PLOBroOfficial. We're going to be back streaming Saturday, but our current schedule is Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday from 9 p.m. Eastern until we feel like stopping. And you can also check me out on Twitter at PLOBro and Instagram and Facebook at PLOBroOfficial. Thanks again for stopping by. Have a good day.